How's it going, everybody? And welcome in to the Captain Recap presented by Capital One, where, we look over the episodes we just saw, episodes 3 and 4 of this 7-part series on the life and times of Yankee captain Derek Jeter. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the ESPN app. MLB writer Joon Lee and myself, Bill Murphy, can take a little bit broader of a perspective because we are very pleased to be joined by the director and producer of the film, Randy Wilkins. Randy, first question from me. In all the time that you spent staring at a timeline and putting this 7-part series together and watching these tapes and these interviews ad nauseum, what was your biggest takeaway?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Biggest takeaway is just how committed Derek is to the values of trust and loyalty. Kind of plays as a foundation of how he interacts with the world. I think, trust and loyalty and his biracial identity are kind of the bedrocks of how he views the world, in my opinion. I think that trust and loyalty are things where, you cross that line that he creates, then the relationship changes. And I knew that, like, as a fan following Derek, the people had mentioned it, but I think to the extent that it impacts and influences the way that he deals with the world around him, I just wasn't aware. And I think that his candidness about having trust issues and where some of those trust issues stem from, I have a better understanding of why Derek navigated the public world the way that he did. And it makes sense. I mean, I totally get it now.
So I'm curious, at what point do you start to identify the themes that you're trying to stretch across all of these episodes? And then how do you kind of decide how to weave together Derek's interviews with the interviews that you have with all the other people that were kind of also characters in his life?
I mean, some of the themes, going into it, I mean, that you're going to talk about race, you're going to talk about family, you're going to talk about celebrity culture, you're going to talk about his relationship with the Yankees. I mean, some of it is stuff that, going into it, you want to tackle. So a lot of it is just preparation, understanding the story, understanding Derek as much as you possibly can. And then you let the footage take you where it takes you. I always have this belief, and I believe, June, I've mentioned this to you before, but footage is queen. So when the footage starts identifying themes and it starts popping up and there's anecdotes to go along with it, you go with where the footage is telling you. You know what I mean? Like, that kind of creates the roadmap for you to follow. And then from there, you're just trying to figure out things that make it engaging and make sure that you're hitting emotional beats, but you're also making it entertaining for people. You don't want this to be some dreary kind of like let down, negative kind of like experience. You want people to enjoy it. There's highs and lows, and you just have to make sure that you can navigate that emotional journey, that roller coaster. So by the end of an episode and by the end of the film, you feel like you've been through something, you've had an experience. So I think it's true with Derek, it's true with any film that you do. You want to have that emotional connection to what you're watching.
What was the hardest thing to pare down? If ESPN had come to you and said, hey, man, we need another 10 minutes somewhere, where you've been like, okay, I know where I'm going. I know what anecdote or moment or season I want to go a little bit deeper into.
There's a couple. I think I would have expanded on race a little bit more because I think it's not just like a Derek center thing, but it's also a Major League Baseball thing. It's an American center thing. I think that there were a lot of directions we could have gone in there. I think I probably would have done a little bit more with 96 since it was his first year. I would have talked a little bit more about the impact of 97 on 98 and the impact of 97 on Derek and Derek's career. I think those are the things that immediately stand out. I think that there are probably other places, but there's so much, it's hard for me to go back and look at all the episodes like in this one quick moment. But those are some of the times that stand out to me.
Randy, you're obviously a diehard Yankee fan. And so I imagine you followed Derek's career just as a fan for such a long time. Was there anything that surprised you coming out of the shooting reporting process of this documentary that you didn't expect to learn kind of going in and were surprised to take away from it?
Yeah, I mean, just how intense Derek is. He's one of the greatest competitors of all time. He's at the level of Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, whoever else you can think of, Serena Williams. I mean, he's just an incredibly intense guy when he needs to like turn it on. And I think that kind of presence is something that a lot of people don't realize until they're around him and they start talking to him. But there's like a real intensity with him. And, you see the smile, you see him joking around, you see him having fun and all this other stuff. But like right underneath that is like an edge that, you can't really pick up on unless you're around him. So I think just that presence, like he's charming, he's engaging, but he's also like really intense. And I think that's something that, getting into it, I didn't realize, but by the end, it was very clear that that's a strong part of his personality.
Do you have a specific story from the reporting process that you think illuminates just Derek's intensity that you had from working with him?
There wasn't. It's just like his energy. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't something. I think I would say when they lose in 2001, and he talks about that, you can definitely feel like his anger about it. He's not over it. You can sense his frustration. He says, they had something that was ours, and he totally believes that. You know what I mean? Like that's not like a cliche to him. That's not just something to say. Like he firmly believes that trophy is his and the Yankees. And you can feel it wasn't like a disappointment. There was an anger, that he didn't have what he feels like belongs to him. And it was very real. And I think that that energy is something that you don't really experience with Derek publicly because he wants to be respectful of the game, respectful of opponents and all that stuff. But like underneath that, he's like, no, that's mine. Like you stole something from me. And that connection to winning, that connection to being at the mountaintop, I think is like very strong for him. And that was definitely one moment when we talked about it where you could feel like his energy changed. There are other moments, but they're in other episodes that we haven't seen yet. So I don't want to give it all away. But 2001 is definitely a moment where you feel that edge.
Randy, you talk about that edge. You talked about his trust issues. Sometimes those character traits can be incongruous to effective leadership. Yet here Derek is the face of the franchise as a very young man. And then as we see within episodes 3 and 4, he's named the 11th captain in the history of this illustrious franchise. How did those things come together? Those character traits that are great towards winning, but can be perhaps an issue in terms of galvanizing men. I mean, I guess we saw an issue with Chad Curtis, but how did Derek make all of that work?
Confidence. He's extremely confident, and that confidence is why in 96, like all these veteran guys look to Derek to lead them. He just has an unbelievable amount of confidence in himself, and it rubs off on the people around him. And I think David Cohn mentions it as well. He has a relentlessness. There's the idea that what's next, never being satisfied, never slowing down. All those things rub off on the people around you. And it's like if your best player has this attitude, you don't have a choice but to match it or you're going to get left behind. And I think the issues of trust and loyalty could play a part, and I feel like it has played a part over Derek's career. But ultimately, he's the leader because he was relentless and confident, and he went out on the field and accomplished things. You know what I mean? He backed it up. It wasn't like, he had this belief in himself and it didn't translate into production or into winning. So he backed it up, and at that point, when you're the guy and you have all these rings, and you're coming to his team or you've been a part of that process and he stands out with his confidence, you have nothing to do but follow him. So I think those are the two big traits as to why people kind of fell in line behind him.
I think through episode 3 and episode 4, one of the biggest places where you kind of explore Derek's relationship with trust and confidence is his relationship with Alex Rodriguez. Going into reporting all of that, knowing kind of all the drama that surrounded it, how do you kind of balance, Derek's experience and then also everything that happened with Alex Rodriguez with the magazine story and then having the magazine writer talk about his experience kind of in the middle of all of that, and also how Alex and Derek's relationship kind of develops over the years? I mean, how did you kind of plan out telling that story and also having both of those guys talk about it, balancing kind of the egos and the stuff that they want to kind of get out there about what their point of views were at that moment.
I don't plan it out too much because, again, it goes back to the footage is queen. So I don't know what they're going to say going into it. I can have a plan. It's like Mike Tyson. You have a plan until you get punched in the mouth. So you have an idea of where you want it to be. You have an idea of what it could be, but you don't really know, especially with something like that where they both haven't really talked about it publicly. You don't really know where this is going until you sit down with them and they start answering the question. So going into it, there's a plan, but there's also, I'm just as curious as everybody else is. Like, what are they actually going to say? Are they going to like give me 2-word answers, or are they going to go down the path? And thankfully, both of them went down the path and they were honest and they spoke their truths. And I think it's important to make sure we highlight that it's their truths, like that's how they see it. And I think for us, we have to be, as filmmakers and as the prime storyteller on this, you have to be balanced. You have to be fair. I can't like push audiences in a certain direction. I can't like make them make a decision. They have to arrive at their own conclusion on who they believe, what they believe, and when they believe it. So you want to be fair, as much as you can be. Obviously, we're editing it, so you don't get like every single word that's spoken, but the intention is to give them a platform for them to speak their truths, and then the audience arrives at their own conclusion. I have my own personal feelings about it, but you wouldn't know what they would be in the episodes. And I think it's also important to point out that it's not just Alex and Derek, but it's Scott-Rob as well when you talk about the Esquire magazine. And for me, that was just as important a voice in that stretch as Derek and Alex. There's a third party in this. And I think a lot of times when we discuss Derek and Alex, a lot of people kind of get a pass. Like there are other factors that go into the relationship and contribute to what happened to that relationship over time. So I think Scott-Rob's presence is just as important in the Esquire scene as Derek and Alex's, because he doesn't care. He has a job to do, and if he can take advantage of someone giving him an opening, he's going to take it. And he says it himself. So I think it's a dynamic relationship. I think it's complicated, and my job was to show how complicated it was and still might be. That I don't know, but back then it was complicated, and it's my job to just put that information out and people can arrive at their own conclusion.
Yeah, that Scott-Rob stinger was so good though at the end of episode 3. I want to go back to Alan Schwartz's quote. He was a former senior editor of Baseball America, where he said that Alex Rodriguez wanted to be a star, Derek Jeter wanted to be a Yankee. And with those guys who have so much in common, yet are aiming at slightly different targets, that is according to Schwartz, how much do you think, I guess, that played into the strain that it had on their friendship?
I think it plays a part. I think it plays a part in Alex's relationships with everybody, from what I can gather. I think Alex has very clear intentions. I think that Alex wanted to win. Like, I don't think that his desire to win was minimized by maybe his desire for other things. But I think it has a strain on their relationship. Derek doesn't like to be the center of attention, which is kind of odd to say because he became like a superstar and transcended the game, but he's like not comfortable with it. You can tell just being around him at events that we've been at together. He doesn't like to be the center of attention. I think he likes to be there. I think he likes to engage with it. But when all eyes are on him, he's like very uncomfortable. And I think on the flip side, Alex probably craves that and is comfortable with it and maybe seeks it out from time to time and has sought it out with some of the decisions he's made during his career. So, yeah, I mean, they're polar opposites in that way. And I think when you have those two ends of the spectrum trying to meet in the middle, there's conflict because they just view the world differently and they view themselves in the world differently. So you're ultimately going to have conflict. And I think that also played itself out over the years.
One of the most interesting also relationship dynamics that I think episode 4 delved into was the relationship between Derek Jeter and George Steinbrenner. And, the brief period of time where Derek Jeter was kind of portrayed in the media as a party person after he took Hideki Matsui out to the club to kind of invite him to become a part of the Yankees. He was named the captain. How did you delve into kind of that relationship and the way that, Jeter was kind of trying to go about trying to be the best teammate possible while dealing with also everything that, other folks and the distractions that kind of came with that?
Yeah, I mean, Derek and George had a tremendous relationship together, and I think you can't really tell Derek's story without including George Steinbrenner. I think George revered Derek in a lot of ways, and I think that there was a tumultuous time between them because they weren't winning anymore. It's very simple, and I think Derek got that, and George obviously got that. So when they weren't winning championships, like some of these storylines start to pop up. But I think that they had such a strong relationship that they could iron it out. They could actually speak to one another honestly and candidly and address it. And I think that Derek's story about being named captain was more about letting Derek know that George loved him more so than like, you have to be the captain now. It was such like a random time that it happened. I think it was an olive branch to Derek from George to be like, you've basically been the captain, but this is me saying like we should be on the same page again. So I think that, again, just like with Alex, it was a dynamic relationship. It was much smoother than his Derek's relationship with Alex, but I think they just both cared about winning so much, and that's what like brought them together. That's what united them. So I think that, you can't really talk about Derek and his Yankee years without talking about George Steinbrenner.
You're watching the Captain Recap presented by Capital One, where ESPN MLB writer Joon Lee and myself, Phil Murphy, explore all the biggest takeaways from episodes 3 and 4 of the 7-part series. And we are privileged for this iteration of this discussion that June and I are having over a few weeks by a man who spent, months and months, upwards of a year working on this, director and producer, Randy Wilkins. Randy, early, basically from the outset of episode 4, you explored 9/11 and the role that the Yankees in particular and sport at large played in America's healing process, getting accounts from Tino Martinez and Bernie Williams and Derek Jeter about their experiences of that day, the immediate aftermath, and ultimately the rest of the MLB season. What was it like for you as a New Yorker and a baseball fan to relive that so closely through that lens?
It was very important to get this story out, especially with everything happening with the pandemic and how it changed all of our lives. I thought it was very important to remind people that we had an event that similarly changed our lives at the beginning of this century. And I think, because time passes and obviously there are more recent events that we've had to work our way through, I think we forget the impact that 9/11 had on us as people emotionally, like no politics aside and all that stuff. I think just emotionally, it changed the way we lived our lives and how we viewed each other and how we were going to navigate the world. And I think that it was really important to remind people how the Yankees kind of factored into that. The Mets did it as well. But how important the Yankees run was at that time, how important Derek Jeter was at that time, how important Bernie, Mariano, go down the line, how important they were to New York City. We tried to make this film accessible to everybody. We didn't want to make it for Yankees fans, but it was a clear intention on our part, to make sure that people felt New York City, that they knew what New York was like at that time. And I think 9/11 is a big piece of that. And going back to your earlier question about, what I would have liked to expand upon, is probably 9/11 as well. We had stories from almost everybody that we interviewed that lived in New York at the time to give us their 9/11 experience. And some of the stories were unbelievable. They were captivating, but we just didn't have enough time. We had to make tough decisions. But 9/11 was crucial to this story. And I think the run that the Yankees had, even though they don't win the championship, I think is one of the most important runs in Yankees history, New York City history, and I would say for the country. I mean, I feel like that was the one time where everybody secretly kind of wanted the Yankees to win to a certain degree, just because of the patriotism that was going on at that time. But yeah, this was like a very important sequence for us in the film.
What were some of the stories that you wish you could have gotten in that you just didn't have time for?
There were people from the Bronx that told stories. Seeing the towers like fall from their rooftop. We have a young man from the Bronx. He's in the film, but there was more to his story, just about, he was in Afghanistan and he knew that he was going to like go to war. He had already been deployed, and like how important the Yankees were to him. Susan Waldman tell us a story about, she was on the bridge. She was on one of the bridges and she saw somebody like on the highway next to her, and they communicated with one another about what was going on. And she was always wondering what happened to this man, like if he was okay, like he was worried about his family. It goes on and on. I mean, there are so many of them from so many different places. And there was one thing we wanted to make sure was that in the depiction of 9/11, there aren't a lot of diverse voices that have a chance to like give their experience of 9/11. And we wanted to add to that conversation. We wanted to make sure that you saw different types of people sharing their 9/11 experience, because America obviously is incredibly diverse. And we wanted to make sure we captured that, a lot of people love this country despite its flaws, and that 9/11 had an impact on them. And we wanted to make sure that there was a diversity in who was telling their story.
Randy, I don't want to reach too far with this association, but you had mentioned that, Derek's disappointment from not closing out that World Series 2001, despite Mr. November and that moment, and how he's still not over that. Given the importance that baseball had in that moment, that New York winning had in that moment, getting to a World Series, how much do you think it being that year that they lost to the Diamondbacks in the fashion that they did correlates to Derek still not being over that? Or is that just a guy who's an out and out competitor and he had a chance at 4 in a row and didn't get it?
Oh yeah, it's because he didn't get 4 in a row. I mean, I feel like he can separate things. So I think for him, he was there for the city of New York, as were the rest of the Yankees and the Yankees organization and the Mets. And I think that, he did a lot along with the other Yankees to heal people as much as he could as a baseball player, in his words. Losing in 01 was all about, I didn't get 4 in a row. Like we lost the World Series. I've never experienced this. We had a chance to win. We're an inning away from getting another title. I mean, he says it, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say in the in the press conference, and, how am I going to celebrate? And he's thinking that on the field, and then they lose. So I think that it just came down to, I lost in the World Series. That's my trophy. That's my ring. And I'm not happy that, they're not coming home with me. So
moving on from 2001 to one of the areas that you start to kind of dive into is the dynamic between the Red Sox and the Yankees during that time period in 2003 specifically. And you start to bring in the kind of the people that were involved with the Red Sox during that time. What was the thing that you were kind of most curious about, heading into the reporting process about specifically 2003 and what the dynamic between those two teams were like? Because we haven't seen the rivalry, I think, hit that level of emotion since then.
Yeah, I think it was just recapturing like what the level of baseball was at that time between the two teams, like really making it clear that they didn't like each other. But at the same time, this is basically the height of baseball competition. I'm not really sure you can get higher than that, and we wanted to make it feel nostalgic, but also have some insight from both sides about how they felt. I think a lot of times the Yankees and the Red Sox do a really good job of just like not being candid about how they actually felt about that time, like what went down. You might get a couple stories here and there, but they, for whatever reason, I guess they kind of have the same ethos as like, you just don't like talk about it publicly. And our intention was to get some of those insights, like how did you really feel about the other side? And like, how did you feel about those games? What happened during those games? So we really wanted we wanted that section to be emotional for people. Like we want Red Sox fans to be excited about it and feel things. We want Yankees fans to feel things. But we also wanted to provide insight so both sides could feel like they learned something after this. You know what I mean? Like we were trying to accomplish a lot of things with that section, and also let people who might not be a part of those fan bases and might be fed up with both sides that actually it was like really good baseball. You know what I mean? Like it was just the height of the sport in the league at that time, and we wanted to make sure that we captured all of that.
What did you enjoy most hearing in those conversations, whether it was from Nomar or Theo Epstein or somebody like that?
Oh, it was like Jorge saying we hated them. You know, just say it, man. Like, you know, like as a Yankees fan, you hate the Red Sox and vice versa. And I wanted to hear somebody say, yeah, man, I hated them. Like, I don't like Pedro. And, I love Nomar saying that he just assumed that the Red Sox were going to make the World Series in 2003 for this like magical World Series with two teams that at the time like had curses. And I felt like that was such like a great insight because I know people were talking about it, but it wasn't like a huge deal. But to hear like one of the faces of the team at that time, they just say, yeah, man, I thought that this was going to happen. Like it was destiny, was great. I felt like Nomar was really good talking about that stuff. Theo Epstein talking about, these elitists, entitled Yankees winning again, and that's how people feel about the Yankees. But to hear like an executive of such great stature, in my opinion, maybe the greatest GM of all time in the history of the league, saying, yeah, man, these guys are entitled. Like they're elitists. Like I hate them too. Like just like everybody else, like that's the stuff that you want. I feel like that riles people up. I think it gets people excited about that time again. And, that's just because that's what fans feel. So to see that people that were actually involved feeling the same way was great. And I also love, I have to say, as a Yankees fan, Derek saying that he expected Boston to choke. I mean, that's always great to hear, especially from the captain. I know Joon's not happy about that, but it was a lot of like, the fans feel a certain way, but to hear the players and the executives kind of feel the same way as a lot of fans, depending on what side you're on, was like what made it really fun and engaging.
What was the thing that you as just like a baseball lover and as a fan were hoping to be able to take out and find out about, that kind of period of time through this entire experience? Like, is there anything that you just like kind of stirred up in you that you were just so excited to find out throughout the course of making this entire movie?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're hearing from greats, so you're hearing like insight of people that has such like magical moments or like long lasting moments, depending if they played for the Yankees or not. I loved hearing from Theo Epstein as much as I did Derek. Like all that stuff. I love all of it. I love baseball dearly, and to hear all the greats and impactful people discussing their experiences is just like magical to me. So the one thing I did get thrown off by was Nomar saying that the 99 Red Sox were like better than the Yankees. And it was just like, everybody in the room was like, what are you talking about, man? Like we don't remember it that way. So even like hearing those perspectives were great because it like riles you up. Myself and one of the producers, Gabe Honig, are a huge Yankees fan. So like when Nomar was having this discussion with me, we were like chomping at the bit to just be like, Nomar, like, are you serious? Like you cannot be serious that you thought that 99 team was better than the Yankees. We kept talking about it. Like even when he left, we asked like Roger Clemens about it later, and he like laughed it off. He was like, absolutely not. Darryl Strawberry, that led to Darryl doing the choke sign or whatever when we talked about the 99 ALCS. So yeah, I mean, all those moments are great because you're hearing it from the inside, and it riles you up.
And I don't know how Joon has been consuming this series, but we get screeners to prepare for interviews like these. So I watch it a couple days in advance, late at night after my family's gone to bed. And there have been a couple guests that have made me kind of like, oh, sit up. Like, I want to hear what this guy has to say. None more so than Michael bleeping Jordan. What resonated most with you hearing MJ's thoughts and editing his thoughts on Derek Jeter's championship bravado?
Well, I mean, I'm a Bulls fan, so meeting Michael Jordan in the flesh was like, and you can't even put it into words. It was incredible, but it just validates a lot of things that other people talked about, because there are very few people that are either at Derek's level or beyond Derek's level. And Michael Jordan is one of those people that's beyond. I mean, he's the greatest in his sport, in my opinion. So it just validates how an athlete of that caliber thinks, how they view the world, how they have to navigate the world, how the world is like really small, what it takes to be a champion at that level. I mean, it just like makes everything official when you hear from someone like him. Like what he's saying is almost gospel when it comes to all this stuff, because nobody's experienced it more than him in the modern era, you know, and on so many levels. So the stardom, the will to win, the consumption with winning, like, you know, that's the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters. But also the reality that, like, you have to depend and trust other people. And, you know, the spotlight is on you more so than other people. And how do you deal with that? How do you navigate with it? So, I mean, when every time he spoke, it was like, yeah, you're right, Michael. You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. Exactly right. Absolutely. Yes, you're right, Michael. So there's just it just makes it official. You know, it legitimizes a lot of what you hear and what people say about athletes on that level.
So what should we expect in episodes 5 and 6 moving forward?
5 is we start talking about real life stuff. We talk about race. We talk about celebrity culture. We talk about the media. You know, we talk about things outside of just the playing field. June will be happy to know that we also discussed the 2004 ALCS. So that's, you know, we have that. So it's not, you know, it's not all like flowers for Derek. You know, we started getting into the phase of Derek's career where he gets criticized and where he's not winning and things are not going well. So we start this, now we're showing the flip side of things for Derek. His relationship with the Yankees becomes strained in episode 6. He continues to lose. I mean, and then he gets one more title, but then there are issues after that. And then his life changes when he meets his future wife. So, you know, we're entering the stage now where things aren't as rosy and they're not going as well for Derek as they had earlier in his career. And we hit that head on. You know, more criticism starts coming his way. More people start questioning if he still has it. You know, all those things. He gets hurt. So now he's dealing with the mortality of his career. So, you know, now once we get past episode 4, we're like really starting to talk about, you know, the other side of things. The other shoe is starting to fall a little bit for Derek, and we get into all of that.
I hate to say it, guys, but that is all the time that we have. Director and producer of The Captain, Randy Wilkins, thank you so much for joining us. And for all of you who tuned in, thank you for joining us as well. June and I will be back next Thursday, August 4th, 11 p.m. Eastern time to run back episodes 5 and 6. But this has been The Captain Recap presented by Capital One. We'll catch you next time.